Hello friends, I'm Kayla. Welcome to my channel. I spent the last month reading the 10 best books of the century so far as decided by the New York Times. It took them a week to unveil all of their top 100, 20 at a time, and I filmed my impression of that each day that it happened. So let's get into that, and then I vlogged my experience reading this stack. I have read 2 books from these 20 things. Men We Reaped is one of the best memoirs I've ever read, and Station 11 is my current favorite, Emily St. John Mandel. On this list, I see books following CIA operatives, Italian painters, opera singers, books about cancer, quantum theory, stories set in Mexico, Vietnam, Japan, Cairo. Of the 18 remaining that I haven't read, the ones that are loosely on my TBR are The Sympathizer by Viet Thanh Nguyen and Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. I'd be down to read those, and also kind of like any nonfiction that I see here. I doubt this is the last time we'll be seeing Elena Ferrante on this list of 100 and Anne Patchett. There's a whole bunch of authors that I could imagine that we'll see coming up, like Colson Whitehead, Alice Munro, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Kazuo Ishiguro, and probably like 60 to 70 more books that I haven't read. And that's my experience with what's been revealed for day one. Numbers 80 through 61, I have read a whopping 0, which if you clicked on this video not knowing me, might be concerning. Like, who's this girl talking about the 100 best books of the 21st century and she clearly doesn't read? If you do know me, this is not surprising. A lot of these titles, reasonably, seem to be harder hitting general fiction, historical fiction, literary fiction, award-winning types of books, which I do read, but not as often as genre fiction. But I do enjoy it when I read it. There are 2 books on my physical TBR from this list, Exit West and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which I've been putting off for very different reasons. And then I have always been intrigued by Demon Copperhead, and because of this list, We the Animals has been added to my TBR, so that's exciting because I liked the last Justin Torres I read and I didn't actually know he had anything else. If I were making a top 100 and I was thinking about the harder hitting titles, I would grab The Death of Ifagoji by Akwaeke Emezi, How Beautiful We Were by Mbola Mbui, Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey, Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, and I'll be shocked if On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong is not in the top 100. I don't think I have many thoughts on this list. There's a couple translated works here, there's some nonfiction, some short stories, but not too many things that have sparked too much interest for me personally in my reading taste. So I'll see you tomorrow. On to day 3, numbers 41 through 60, and I have read 3, which is not impressive, but a great improvement over yesterday, so I'll take it. I adored The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, The Vegetarian by Hong Kang not so much, and then seeing the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin was just really exciting. If there's gonna be fantasy represented on this list, I expected this to be here. Usually books that I put into my list of all-time favorite, like top 10 or 20 ever, I don't expect other people to love, or I understand why people may not have similar taste to me. This is one that I don't understand the people who don't love it. So if I were to build my top 100 speculative books, this is a stack of ones you would absolutely see in there. Monstrilio, This Is How You Lose the Time War, The Marrow Thieves, How High We Go in the Dark, Severance, Middle Game, Circe, Babel, The Martian, and obviously Bunny. This one I wouldn't ever expect to be on the list, along with most of these. As far as what's on my TBR, I have these 2, A Brief History of 7 Killings and A Mercy, which I'm definitely happy to see here and should encourage me to pick them up sooner. Small Things I've obviously heard of, I've seen around a lot, I would consider reading. And then the same is true with Trust, but I didn't know it was like an oh my god people's favorite. I look at this cover and I thought it was like a sci-fi dystopian. And with its inclusion on this list, I don't know if it makes me more excited or less excited to read it now. We got our first graphic novel mentioned and the Alice Munro I was anticipating, but I'm sure there'll be more. There was plenty of war fiction and nonfiction, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. 40 through 21 are up. I have read 2, and I'm not surprised to see either of them. A Visit from the Goon Squad was lowly rated by me, but I do understand the appeal. And then Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates is an excellent manifesto memoir that I gave 5 stars. On the topic of nonfiction, some nonfictions that would be on my top 100 list are this one, which we talked about, Men We Reaped, Know My Name by Chanel Miller, Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay, Something by Billy Ray Belcourt, Something by Vivek Shraya, A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott, and my all-time favorite, A Little Devil in America by Hanif Abdurraqib. We got the Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, but not one of the titles that I have read from her. We got 2 more Jasmine Wards, but I prefer her nonfiction, so I haven't read either of these 2. And then there was Cloud Atlas and Atonement, which have been recommended to me a lot before. I just haven't read them. I don't know that there's much else here that really intrigues me, but I can be convinced to read almost anything. I would love to be able to say by the end that I've read 10% of the top 100. So I'm crossing my fingers that I'll be able to check off 3 more in tomorrow's final top 20. The day has arrived for the top 20. I'm so excited to see the top 10 and find out what I'm reading. I haven't peeked, I haven't looked, and we're just gonna see for the first time together. Well, you probably already know if this is a video you clicked on and you care about this type of thing. I'm expecting My Brilliant Friend to be pretty high up there. I'm hoping The Road to be high up, or on the list at all, because those are 2 that I feel like I need to read. Okay, here we go. Number 20 is Erasure. Oh, I wish I got to read this. I just read The Trees by Percival Everett and it was so good, and I do want to read this one. 19 is Say Nothing, A True Story of Murder and Memory in Northern Ireland by Patrick Rodden Keefe. I feel like I've heard of this. Lincoln in the Bardo. I do think I own this. This is it the 3rd George Sanders on this list? Oh, we've got The Cello by Paul Beatty. I DNF'd that one, and I usually love satire, so I would have given it another try if it was in the top 10. The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay. I've never seen. My bad. Pachinko. Oh, I should have predicted Pachinko would be on here. I haven't read it, but I'd be happy to. Outline by Rachel Cusk. I don't know if I heard of. There's the, oh no, it's not in the top 10. Okay, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I will read, I promise, at some point. The Year of Magical Thinking. I also should have predicted to be here. It's not looking good for me reading 3 more to hit 10 though. And here we have the top 10. Oh, Gilead, is that how you pronounce that? Number 9, I have read, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. Expected that one. I didn't like it. I understand other people who like it, but it was not my favorite. Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald. I unfortunately haven't heard of. The Underground Railroad, I was expecting to be on here, and I think I have it in my TBR closet, so happy to read that one. 2666. This was on Paul Tremblay's top 10. I was honestly considering, like, do I want to read the top 10 of the New York Times or do I want to read Paul Tremblay's top 10? Because there's like a whole lore here with me reading his favorite books on my channel. And I definitely recognize this one, so that's exciting. Number 5 is The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. I recognize that author's name. I don't know if this specific book, I know what it is. Number 4 is The Known World by Edward P. Jones, which I've heard of. Number 3 is Wolf Hall, which I've heard of. I think that's the second Hilary Mantel on here. The Warmth of Other Suns, Isabel Wilkerson. I haven't heard of, so sorry. And number 1 is gonna be My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Happy to read that. I knew that would be number 1. I just had a feeling, because it's not one you can really contest because it's so many people's favorite, including like the entire series and everything she's ever written. Do I know that much about what it is? No. At the end of the day, I've read 8, but by the end of this video, I will have read 17 because of the top 10, I only need to read 9 of them. I feel like some of these are long. I'm a little worried for myself, but I'll check in with you when I've acquired some and have started reading. All right, it's a couple days later. I've officially obtained half of the books that I needed to. Obviously, I already had this one, but I have gotten 4 that I need to from the library. 4 more are on their way. In this moment, at the beginning of my journey, when hopes are so high, all I have to say is I better enjoy the majority of these books, because otherwise this video is going to be inundated with comments from people saying, why didn't you just read 10 of the books that were already on your TBR? Or why didn't you just read the top 10 books of the Reader's Choice? Because at this point now, New York Times has also put out a secondary list asking for readers to vote on their top 100, and there's a whole secondary list. That list does align more with my reading history, but not necessarily my taste. I've completed far more from that list for sure, I think 27 out of the 100, but I disagree with probably a third of them. I respect the impact they had on other people, but they're books that I rated lower, sometimes much lower than the average reader. So that list coming out actually encourages me that maybe I will enjoy books more from the literary luminaries list, which is what they called like the 500 people who got together, authors and people in literature, and then like the New York Times book review people themselves to actually curate everything, maybe my taste will align more with them. I do have more thoughts and opinions and stats on the initial 100, so I'm gonna pop in between every book review here and just give you some random thoughts. In this moment, I have in total, these plus the other ones, 4,600 pages to read. So let's get to it. Since I'm covering a lot of books in this video, I figured I would update you at like the halfway point of each one, and then once I finished it. So Gilead is a town in Iowa in this book, and we're following a man and his letters. It's an epistolary novel. He is a pastor, and they're letters to his son. They're basically just memories of his life with his son, things about his own father, his upbringing. It starts out with him trying to find the grave of his father and reminiscing about things. It's not broken up by like days or specific letter. Like it doesn't start each one with "Dear son," but you can tell that it's a series of like different thoughts at different times that he's sharing. And sometimes it feels like a traditional narrative. You get lost in the story that he's telling, and then it'll go, you wouldn't remember this moment, or you know more about my death than I do, and it reminds you that you are inside a letter and it's written addressed to a specific person. And while he reminisces about life experiences, he's sharing his musings about life, the position in the church that he's in, how he feels about various things about life and death and family and kindness. And it's just a lot of theological musings. It's definitely well written. I'm having a decent time with it, and I'm gonna wrap it up pretty quickly. It's reasonable to say that the number one person that I see enjoying this book is the number one person who already has this on their TBR. The person who has the same religious affiliation, and that's the reason that it's on their TBR to begin with, is because they want to feel closer to their faith. They want to follow a reverend from a line of reverends who is discussing morality in their mind. This is obviously a message to his son, but it also is to the reader. The first half I wouldn't have said felt preachy in any way to the reader. The second half absolutely did. The majority of it were passages about a connection with the Lord and what the Lord would want from you. So this is an important thing, which I've told many people, and which my father told me, and which his father told him. When you encounter another person, when you have dealings with anyone at all, it is as if a question is being put to you. So you must think, what is the Lord asking of me in this moment, in this situation? The last one I tabbed was the advice to not look for proof of God. It said, don't bother with them at all. They are never sufficient to the question, and they're always a little impertinent, I think, because they claim for God a place within our conceptual grasp, and they will likely sound wrong to you even if you convince someone else with them. That is very unsettling over the long term. Christianity is a life, not a doctrine. The Lord gave you a mind so that you would make honest use of it. I'm saying you must be sure that the doubts and questions are your own, not, so to speak, the mustache and walking stick that happen to be the fashion of any particular moment. He's frequently mentioning the Bible, the commandments to live by, the idea that if he were to come to his own counsel, the advice that he would give people. As someone who has absolutely no religious ties, this didn't impact me in the way that it would someone else. So I'm giving it 3.5. I feel like it's more of a 4-star objectively. The writing is beautiful. There is a very strong character voice, and the morals and lessons are very clear. There are stories of regret. There are stories of forgiveness. Considering the whole concept of this is that it's a man approaching the end of his life and reflecting on so many things, it didn't really have the emotional punch that I was expecting. I think everyone will be able to appreciate the writing and the skill involved, and if you gain something from it as far as like sermons, then I could see why you love it. For the average person with this not already on their TBR, it's not something that I would go out of my way and say, oh my God, everybody has to read. Before we get into the next book, a quick intermission for stats and things that I just find interesting. The first one is about where the authors hail from, the countries they're represented here, and how this is a very American list. Before I do that, I think I should mention the fact that I'm not going to be talking about the 9th book in here because I've already read number 9, so we're going to skip to number 8. But I thought just to share my quick thoughts about Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. At this point, I've forgotten almost everything about it except the fact that I didn't like it. So I'm just going to insert a couple clips of me reviewing it in the past, probably poorly. And 50 pages into Never Let Me Go, I have no idea what this is about. It's like all of these children at this school, and they have to be donors, but I don't even know what that means. And then they make art, and then like they get their art taken away, and then they can like buy art from each other within the school, and that's the only possessions they'll ever own. But then I think most of the book is going to be set later in the future, following three main characters, and I don't know, like their current lives, them reflecting on their childhood in this school. I didn't like their narrator voice. I didn't enjoy the way that she was telling this story. I didn't care about all of the silly little things that were going on. I wanted to learn more about what was actually going on and not the interpersonal relationships, because I also don't feel like we got past like a surface level with a lot of these characters. I understand why it was set up the way it was and why the characters act the way that they do, and why they have a lack of questioning, why it lacked some emotional impact, why it lacked certain conversations about morality. Like, it all makes sense. I just didn't have a great time. Honestly, like, a little bit baffled by this being as popular as it is. Now back to the stats about authors, countries, languages. I think it's not as apparent just looking at the top 10 that this is a very American list, because 50% of the books mentioned in this video actually come from authors born outside of America. But the overall list of 100, the number is closer to 30%. And that percentage significantly drops if you consider authors who were born in another country but have American citizenship or are actively living in the States. As a non-American, this stat is not surprising to me at all, in the same way that I'm not shocked when I go to consume other New York Times media, play my daily games, and they expect me to know things like the US state abbreviations, or they think I might know slang for American beers, the zodiac sign of Nancy Pelosi and Tim Walz, or the term for Kamala Harris supporters. There are authors from 36 different countries present in these top 100, the majority from America, but we've got Japan to Nigeria, Iran to Mexico, with the US being so heavily represented, not just in, you know, where the authors are from, but the types of stories, the types of titles, the American experience being at such the forefront. It is surprising, obviously very disappointing to me, the absence of Indigenous folks from America or Turtle Island. So that's obviously the largest chunk. The other countries with the most representation, we have 8 authors from the United Kingdom, 3 from Canada, 3 from Korea, 2 from Jamaica, 2 from Germany. There are only 13 books in translation, books originally written in a language other than English on the list. Books written in Spanish, Japanese, Italian, German. So let's get into a German authored book next. So Austerlitz is a person in this book. There is another reason behind the name, and it talks about how he got his name, but that's the first thing I learned, is it is the main character. It's not our narrator, and I can never decide if I prefer books written like this, where we have a narrator who is a character, but the book focuses on like the history and stories of someone they are speaking to, and learning their history, and therefore they are the titular character. Or if I prefer stories where it's just like this omniscient third-person narration style, and we're witnessing the thoughts and histories of, again, that character. Being written in this way makes it feel like it's a nonfiction book, which is very interesting. The first 100 pages especially, actually it's the whole thing, but I think because I was unfamiliar with it, it felt especially dense at the beginning, because there's no real quotation dialogue or pauses or breaks. It's just edge to edge text. It opened with a lot of description, a lot of setup of who Austerlitz is, or how he doesn't know who he is, and his interest in architecture and railways. And we come to understand this character as somebody who doesn't know his own history, and very late in life he wants to look into who his parents really were. At a very young age, he escaped Jewish persecution and Nazis and was sent away and saved by his mother via kinder transport from Prague. And he is now learning what came of his parents. That is the driving force of the novel, but it's not the focus. Like, you're just learning about the life that he did live, had the memories that he lacks, and things that he cares about, and our narrator getting like involved in this life. There are beautiful quotes, especially about life and death. There was one about talking about moths. In the warmer months of the year, one or other of those nocturnal insects quite often strays indoors from the small garden behind my house. When I get up early in the morning, I find them clinging to the wall, motionless, I believe, said Austerlitz. They know they have lost their way, since if you do not put them out again carefully, they will stay where they are, never moving until the last breath is out of their bodies. And indeed, they will remain in the place where they came to grief, even after death, held fast by the tiny claws that stiffened in their last agony until a draft of air detaches them and blows them into a dusty corner. It's talking about how they still feel pain and loss and grief, and only other animals have been associated with those and tied so closely to humans, but these insects like just give him a different perspective on life and death. As expected, being in the top 10, it is very well written, and now today I'm gonna finish it. I would love to tag somebody in who is smarter than me, who could talk about this more eloquently. W.G. Sebald and his translator Anthea Bell are very talented. There's a lot of great, just line by line quotes, sentences, metaphors in here. It's not a fast-paced or entertaining read, which you might think to yourself, duh, like why would you think it was? That is one of the #1 complaints of low ratings that I've seen. So I will confirm that for you. You are either somebody who typically enjoys this type of story, this type of pace, this perspective, you will likely enjoy this, or you're somebody who needs like really captivating plot points and things that are moving things along that aren't internal monologue and confronting feelings, in which case I wouldn't recommend this to the average reader. I would most recommend this to the literary fiction reader. I think there are times when especially genre fiction readers, people who love thrillers or they love horror, they love fantasy, they think to themselves, I want to get into books like this, or how do I get into them? I don't think this is your jumping off point. Well, I do think there are important topics, and I think it's well written, and I think this could be emotionally impactful for virtually anybody. The package it exists in requires a lot of focus and concentration. Plot-wise, there's not much more to talk about. It's about this man figuring out his past, and I think a big theme of it is memory. The idea that you can recover memories, but also him in this situation being fed memories by somebody is just an interesting concept, because you can question as a reader, is he actually remembering, or are these memories being forced upon him and he thinks he's remembering? And also, you know, we all know that your memory changes every time you remember something, and so it comes to a point where your memories are no longer the event, but your recollection of the event. So even the woman who is reminding him of certain things, are her memories even genuine? I don't know if much of that really matters to the story. That was just one takeaway of mine. I liked a lot of the conversations in here. This just is not my type of book. I think it was well split up, if not by paragraphs and chapters, by photos, which were enjoyable to look at. I'm gonna give this a 3.5 as far as enjoyment and takeaway, just for myself as a reader. Respect it a lot, see why people like it. I want to quickly talk about the stats around genre. Of the top 10, there is 1 nonfiction, but in the entire top 100, 28 were nonfiction, so that's more than a quarter of the total books being nonfiction. The rest are fiction. And then within fiction, 30 of those books are general fiction, literary fiction, contemporary stuff, 23% historical, 8% of the books were short story collections. And then the last 11% is where all of the speculative poetry, graphic novels, and fantasy are, where mostly there was only like 1 or 2 of each of those. I don't think this is a necessarily surprising stat. The blend of genres is pretty much what I expected. I have gotten to that halfway point in the Underground Railroad, so I can tell you what it's about. We are in 1820 in Georgia, and we're following a character named Cora who is enslaved on a plantation. And this is her story of finding freedom. And the journey follows years and her travels, and I don't know when it will end or how far or how many years we're going to cover, but it's kind of like at every turn, she realizes that she's not free. When she thinks she has gotten somewhere, she's made progress. I'm just making sure there are multiple years, because I just said it follows multiple years and I don't actually know that for sure. Maybe it's a shorter time period than I thought, because there are people trying to track her down, chase her down. One of her first steps is discovering the Underground Railroad, which in here is a physical Underground Railroad. The description was really interesting of it. And she thinks she's found freedom, but then she has to change her name, and then that person, those papers, she still belongs to somebody, so she's now journeying to the next thing, and then it's just this constant story of survival. It's very factual, it's very quick, it's very to the point, and deaths are brushed over very quickly, and we're just constantly moving on. And in that way, I want to refer to it with words like distant and cold, and I think that I imagine is intentional, because that is how the sick, abusive kidnappers enslavers were treating slavery. Cora is her own character and represents her own story, but she also kind of represents everyone. It doesn't feel to me like Cora is the main character. It feels like the idea of enslavement is the main character. So it's not necessarily internal. It's not about her emotions and her desires, and that's possibly why it feels cold. But the book doesn't need to be that. It doesn't need to delve into all of her thoughts and feelings, because you shouldn't need that to feel empathy and to feel like impacted by the story. Instead, chapters are very short. They're also from they're following a lot of different characters. They're all in third person, and we're just witnessing a lot of what's going on. And that feels like it's meant to represent Cora and how quickly she needs to be moving and how she can't stop to think and wonder, but rather she's in survival mode. Her mentality is freedom. Her mentality is safety, and she just has to keep going. Freedom being her sole motivation is how she's surviving. So rather than delving into her psyche and distracting like other storylines, it just says things very to the point, like Cora couldn't sleep. Cora was shivering. It's not in her head. And instead we visit many other characters and many other storylines and situations like in the periphery. Obviously this can be enjoyed by anybody, but I think especially for people who haven't read any nonfiction or fiction about slavery, especially in this time and in this location, it can definitely give you an educational sense of things that were going on and how they've impacted things today, such as Black folks being used for scientific research, the sterilization of people, and it even talks a lot about the treatment of Indigenous folks. That's where I'm at the book. At this point in life, I just dropped my kid off at hockey camp and I need to drive home, and I'm gonna pick up the audiobook so I'm not wasting any time. I just realized that Bonnie Turpin, she's my favorite narrator, does this audiobook, so I'm gonna listen to it and I'll let you know when I finished. All right, this is a very good book. Not that it needs my endorsement. It was challenging to get through. I think being confronted with so much violence and trauma is something you definitely need to be mentally prepared for going into this. This book's inclusion in the top 10 definitely makes sense to me as far as covering American history, representing America's past being built on the backs of the Black community. It featured great writing, a unique alternate history concept, while also being an important read at the same time. This being my third Colson Whitehead now, it is my favorite. We follow many characters throughout the story who are halting Cora's progress, but also those who are helping. And she finds her community. She ends up surrounded by many other people who are becoming stewards of their own fate, and it's beautiful to watch. But then there are also some really gut-wrenching moments near the end, including a chapter from a character I was not expecting us to visit, and it hurt a lot. I do feel conflicted about some of the chapters. Like, were all of them necessary? All of these side characters, were they the right people to get insight from? Was there enough commentary alongside the dialogue so that everybody reading this like can have the proper takeaways and able to distinguish why events were happening and how to feel about them? For the most part, yes, absolutely. But it left me with a 4-star feeling. And now, since I want to go in order, I did end up buying this one because the library was not going to come through with my reservation early enough to read it. And I also had the same thing happen with this. So I have now purchased 2 books for the video, and I got these 2 from the library. So I have all of the top, well, 9, the 9 that I need to read. So we're moving on to this big one next. Now, before I get into the longest book in the top 10 list, let's talk about length of books. I really like the variety in this top 100 as somebody who loves short books. There are quite a few short ones on here. Some of the shortest books on the list hit around 130 pages. And then the average book of the top 100 is 390 pages, which is interesting considering that if you just look at the top 10 that I'm reading, the average length is actually 492. The longest books on this list are well into 900 pages. Far from the Tree, Post-War, and my very next read. This is 2666 by Roberto Bolaño. I am still waiting at 600 pages in to find out where the title came from and what it means. And I've been reading this for about a week now. I took it on vacation with me. I read it a little bit each day, and now we've been home for a few days, and I just read the largest piece so far. which is part 4 or book 4. This was written as like connected stories. It does make up a whole novel. I think especially once I read the last part, it will all, I'm assuming, connect even more. Written at the end of the author's life and then chosen to be published in 2004 by his children as a whole standalone novel, coming in at over 1,000 pages after his death. And then it was translated, that was in 2004, and then translated it to English by Natasha Wimmer in 2008. The first chunk of this, 160 pages, I was absolutely enamored. It's following a group of friends or colleagues. They all work in translation, and they're all obsessed with this elusive writer that no one has really met, but people say they've met, named Akamboldi. And then the 5th part, we're finally getting back to like, we're gonna learn his story, which I'm so excited about. But it was reminding me a bit of like The Secret History or If We Were Villains, the dynamic between all of these interesting characters. There's 4 of them. One of them is a woman. There are a lot of messy relationship dynamics between the group. And there's also some violence and some things that come into the story. So their obsession, their love lives, their careers, and then also things about society and culture. And then suddenly it was over. It was over too fast. And then part 2 is the shortest part. And it's about this man and his wife who left him and his daughter. And it's him being worried about his daughter's future, wanting her to get out of the country. And then the 3rd part was about a completely different person named Fate. And he, again, I was enamored by this section. He is this reporter who's covering for someone else. He went to Mexico to write about the fights. And while he was there, he learned about, you know, the violence occurring and femicide and wanted to write about that. But the people in charge said, no, just focus on, you know, this sport. And there was just something about the character, the writing of it. Like there were passages that I loved. There was this one story that was about like the Black Panthers and something about a starfish. And there was just something so beautiful about that section. There was a recipe for like Brussels sprouts that I was just like, this is the exact thing that needs to be in this book right here. It was just so random, but then the whole section was like heavy and lighthearted at the same time. It was such a mix of things. And then once I got home from vacation, I got into the longest part, which is part 4, the part about the crimes. And it is just story after story of all of the women who were brutally raped and murdered in this certain time span. It was absolutely exhausting to read, and I think that's obviously intentional. I'm sure it was exhausting to write. I'm sure it's exhausting to witness, but it's something we need to witness. And it wasn't just names. It wasn't just this person, this happened to them, next person, next person, next person. Because I've also read books that have pages like that to just really drive home the amount of people impacted by something so horrific. But it gave them stories, it gave them families, it gave them jobs. It really painted vivid pictures of these women and then the brutal attacks that happened to them. And then also brought in detectives into that section. It became kind of a police procedural of trying to solve these crimes, figuring out if it was one person responsible for so many things, or like what is happening in society that all of these men are brutally attacking all of these women. So there was investigating, there was interviewing. I already know I'm going to give this a 5. Which is why I didn't need to update you. I was really just in it. And now I have about 250 pages that I'm gonna get to right now. And I think I'm in the best scenario to finish this because I don't care what's in this final part. I have no expectations for what's in this final part and what we're about to learn about this elusive author. I can't even predict what the purpose of this section is or what it's gonna give me. And I think either way, I'm gonna love it. So I will see you when I'm done. I did it, I finished it. I'm giving it 5 stars. All I know is the next book that I read is going to be via audiobook because I cannot physically stare at any more pages. I'm not gonna lie, after the first part, I had certain expectations about this book, and knowing all of the titles, I thought the last part was going to be really juicy. I thought it was gonna be a lot of reveals. I thought it was that kind of text. It's not, and I came to understand that after switching, and the book being about so many things, statistically factoring how many pages this is, there really isn't any more plot than in the other books that I previously read. It's not suddenly I've read a plot heavy book and that's why I'm giving it 5 stars. In fact, I don't know who to recommend this to. I don't think this is like anything I've ever read before, and I have nothing to compare it to. Not only is it a challenging read at its length, but also with its content, but also with its storytelling style, because there are sections that there's really nothing breaking it up. Sometimes it's very stream of consciousness. It has a lot in common with everything else that I've read, something covering important topics and also something full of a lot of exposition. For some reason, I didn't realize we'd be covering the war at the end and the Nazi regime. And so as I was reading that, I was thinking, okay, the title maybe makes sense if we have 666 at least, like this is an evil number. This is representing the treatment of Jewish folks and also the murder of these women in Mexico, these girls and women being brutally murdered. But then by the end, there was no explanation of the title. There was a little afterword that was talking about the creation of this book and the fact that it's actually like a year, I guess, which I didn't consider, of 2666. As a year that was mentioned in another one of his books. And then also the time period of the 2600s, I guess, was mentioned in another one of his books. And I think it just leaves you to decipher the meaning of that yourself if you are a fan of all of his work. I had many takeaways. There are many themes throughout these pages. Something that I don't think is the main point, but really stuck with me at the end, is the idea that people talk about legacy and what they want to leave behind, but the fact is you often have very little control over that. And perhaps you'll be remembered for something completely different than what you intended or what you thought. My next stat to talk about is, yes, there are 100 books on this list, but there are actually only 87 unique authors. Some people I've seen commenting on this, how it's unfair that some authors have more than one spot. For example, Edward P. Jones, Dennis Johnson, Roberto Bolaño, Philip Roth, Hilary Mantel, Zadie Smith, and Alice Munro all had 2 spots, while 3 spots were taken by Elena Ferrante, George Saunders, and Jesmyn Ward. I get the commentary of it all, but since the judgment is the best books, not best authors, I think it's fair that authors can take up more than one spot. I don't know, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I'm 48% of the way through The Corrections by Jonathan Franzen, according to Libro FM. And all I know so far is this is very much not the kind of book for me. It's pitched as a satirical take on mental health, self-improvement, and instant gratification. There's basically this family, 3 siblings, who are coming back to their family's home, their parents' home, as it might be their father's last Christmas, now that they're all adults. And at the halfway point, that has not happened yet. There's just been a lot of debating if they should go to their parents' house. There's a lot of arguing. It's just been a lot of arguing, which is a lot to listen to. I don't know that I would be having a different experience if I was reading it physically, but I am just hearing arguments between married couples, between parent and children relationships, between siblings. Everyone's just very tense and annoyed and trying to figure out like what they want to do with their lives and also for Christmas. According to Goodreads, I have read 1,700 books and I can't think of a single one I've given 5 stars that has been a multi-generational family drama. If there's like mystery, I can like it. If there's a little fantasy, I can like it. If there's a little bit of like friendship and neighborhood drama as well. But when it's just this family and like the grandparents and the grandchildren and there's like all of this tension, it's just not my favorite. I think there's people who love the Royal Tenenbaums, love Jonathan Tropper, and there's people who hate it. There's people who love, you know, that if you know it, you know it, that one episode of The Bear. It's either your favorite or your least favorite. I dislike all of those things. So far, I am exhausted by this, and if I wasn't doing it for this purpose, I would be DNFing. Now that I finished this, I actually wouldn't compare it to the media that I mentioned because the focus of those has the family back together, and that's the majority of the story. That's not what this was. This was their independent lives leading up to coming together, and it was only the last 10 to 15% of this book that had them together. And it's a shame that that portion was so strong for me because I was just so bored throughout the rest of it. I think the only note that I took while reading is, why is so much of this book taking place on a boat? I get the point of all of these chapters flipping from family member to family member and getting an idea of their life and what they're currently going through, but I could not have cared any less. I don't know if I can chalk it up to the way they were written or the actual plot, and it does have the most plot of anything that I've read for this video. I can see people liking this. I can see it being like somebody's favorite book, but I can't see it being enough people's favorite book to end up in the top 10 in this way. What I can imagine is this standing out to people as a type of book that felt very in the moment, something that's very representative of this Y2K moment in time. Because something that I realized was in the article was them talking about how they decided all of the top, like what order to put them in. And I guess they sent all of the literary luminaries like various polls where it pit two random books up against each other over and over again until it whittled the list down. And so I could see this being pit against something else that doesn't feel representative of a certain moment in time, and then this continuing to move on. The only author that I saw this on the list under, where you can check out some authors' top 10s individually, independently, was Sarah Jessica Parker. In that final 15%, there was some of the funny moments that I was waiting for, and there was also some really devastating feelings. And the book really confronts you with old age, so I can see people connecting with it if you have an elderly parent or they're approaching that time in life where you have to start caring for them. It might feel relevant to you, what's coming up for you, or if you are approaching old age and where your children are going to have to start caring for you, it confronts you with that and what that might look like. But again, that's just such a small portion of it, and we're just busy like hanging out with this family that I don't think you're supposed to like. And I tend to like books with unlikable characters, and actually after the first couple books that I read, I was ready to chalk this top 10 up to being not necessarily the best books, but the most inoffensive, like the most objectively agreed upon books that have good characters and good messages. But this one definitely has characters that you don't like, ones that don't necessarily go through journeys of self-growth and discovery. The family remains dysfunctional. And because of that hard-hitting ending, like I want to give it a higher rating, but I have to be honest that it was a 2. And I get that emotional books are the ones that have a long-lasting impact on people. And I also get that this top 10 doesn't represent the 100, but I really wish that there was just something happy, something beautifully joyous on this list, because the profound and impactful stories don't just have to be rooted in sorrow and suffering and dysfunction. So this one was not for me, but that's okay. Of the top 10 books that I'm reading here, The Corrections is actually the oldest, with a 2001 release date, and the newest is from 2016, The Underground Railroad. Taking the stats of all 100, each year is represented up to like 2022. There was no 2023 books on the list. The oldest book just squeaking in with an April 2000 release date is White Teeth, and the latest publication is from October 2022, and that's A Demon Copperhead, which actually won the Reader's Choice Top 100. And it makes me wonder if it was because it just stands out in recent memory, because in fact, if you look at the Reader's Choice stats versus the Literary Luminary stats, the Reader's Choice are but they are more recent releases. Typically, the New York Times original list, more books are in the first half of the century than the second half, and the Reader's Choice, 65% of the books came out in the latter half of the century. Not that the century is over or that it's even a quarter over. It's almost a quarter over, which is like, this is just such a weird time for this list to be coming out. I just think it's interesting that there is a book from every single year. And I know that statistically there should be like an average of 4 per year, but it does feel intentional that they like made sure to represent every single year. The ones with the most books were 2001, 2004, 2013, 2014, and 2018. And then 2019, 2020, and 2021 only have 1 mentioned. Oh, maybe this isn't the perfect place to film after all. I was like, the sun is setting. It's gonna look nice. No, I have made it to the halfway point of The Known World by Edward P. Jones. This is one of the 2 books, 2666 being the other one, that I had never heard of before this whole list. This is a hair clip. Actually, hold on. Let me put something a little more appropriate. I do own a bookmark business, and I use things like hair clips and receipts for my bookmarks, but here, this is a good promotional opportunity. If you would like one, I'll put the link down below. What else can I promote while I'm here? I have a channel membership where I hang out with and do reading sprints and readathons and read-alongs with the people who monetarily help support my channel. And I'm excited to finish out this vlog so I can move on to something just like stupid and fun. And this is what we happen to be reading next. And I'm working on a spoiler vlog just for the channel members. I will be working on that. We have 3 more books to go after this. This is a faster read than I thought it would be, so I'm gonna wrap it up in probably an hour or 2. Like I said, didn't know what this was, so if you are in the same boat as me, I'll tell you. It is about a Black slave owner, which is obviously a part of history that isn't represented very much in fiction. It's set in Virginia in the 1850s, and we're originally following a man named Henry Townsend, a Black farmer and former slave, when he finds himself becoming a slave owner himself. I think the first time I ever heard of the existence of Black slave owners was in one of these 2 books. I can't remember which one it was, The New Age of Empire or The Black Ghost of Empire, that I read a couple years ago. I do remember the focus was about like certain groups of people who learn of the existence of Black slave owners, using that information as an attempt to like debunk white supremacy or downplay the impact that white folks have had within slavery in a way to say like, see, we're not so bad. It's not about white folks. It's not our fault. You can't blame us white folks. It was everyone. When in fact, like as discussed in whichever book it was, the fact is it was less than half of 1% of slave owners were Black. And most of the time it was people who were purchasing people that were stolen from them. Stolen, kidnapped, abused people from their neighborhoods, from their families. So the existence of this book is an interesting concept to write about, wanting to represent this experience, but I'm not weary of the book, I'm weary of the reviews. Like there's a part of me that's worried that the people who love it and have voted for it are like a part of that group of people who believe that this representation can help them absolve themselves of their own white guilt. What I can tell you at the halfway point is that character that I spoke about isn't necessarily the main character of the book. In fact, we're following a lot of people. There's a whole list of them in the back, and not with a ton of organization. We're hopping between so many different characters, having so many different thoughts, and also flash forwarding to a lot of them in the future in very quick ways. It's just like, we're following this character, they're doing this thing, and in 50 years they would do this. They would go on to have this many children. And it's interesting. It's giving a very vivid picture of this entire community. And I'm just really curious if there's going to be a specific plot point that actually takes the book in a certain direction, or if it's just going to continue to be visiting all of these various people and coming to understand everybody but nobody at the same time. I do quite like the writing and how it's hopping around. I don't know if the action of it is something that's going to stand out by the end, but I'm interested to see where it's going from here. Upon finishing this, as I had hoped and as I expected, I think people are recommending this book, reading and enjoying this book because it's a good book and for no other reason. Because this novel leaves no room to suggest that any enslaved folks are culpable for their own suffering and trauma. This is such an insular story. It's one plantation, it's one county and all of the people in it, but it's obviously having such a larger look at slavery. I don't know that it leaves you thinking about the impact, besides generational trauma, that slavery still has to this day. So I would recommend some nonfiction books to pair with this, where you can learn, if you haven't like thought about it before, considered it before, how these racist institutions continue to affect society. There's something to be said, of course, for reading things slowly and to take them in, and especially because it's a heavy subject matter, maybe you need to take your time with it. But the number one critique that I see from people on skimming through Goodreads reviews is that they couldn't remember who all the people were. They thought there was too many people. They didn't get enough time and attention. And I didn't feel lost at any point, and I'm attributing that to the speed in which I read this. So if you are somebody who you feel like it's natural for you to read this in like a day or 2, I would say go for it. Like, don't take your time, because maybe that's where people are feeling the bit of a disconnect. I'm gonna give this a 4. There was a lot happening in here. There was loving relationships we got to explore. There was obviously morality it was discussing. There was navigating like sexual relationships that are uncomfortable. There was moments of free men, the idea of carrying around this paper with you and that's all you have to prove that you're free, and still people taking advantage of you and selling you to somebody. There are people who are missing. There are people who are fleeing. We lose some vivid characters. And I just think overall, this was well done. I enjoyed the writing of it. I don't know what would have made this a 5 for me. I'd have to think on it a little bit more. No time for that. We have to get on to the next book. Moving on to my next little group of stats is just reader popularity. Obviously, this list is from the literary luminaries, but what does the average reader like? According to Goodreads, the highest rated book of the top 100 is actually a tie between Septology and The New Jim Crow, which got 4.52 star average rating, which are in spot 69 and 78 respectively on the list. The lowest rated books belong to Veronica, The Flamethrowers, and The Vegetarian, each with below a 3.6 average rating. So those are the most loved, but what about just the most read? It is Tomorrow and Tomorrow Tomorrow at the top spot with almost 1 million readers, closely followed by The Goldfinch and The Road, which definitely makes sense because if you look at the Reader's Choice list, these are number 7, number 4, and number 15. Which is significantly, 2 out of those 3 are significantly lower on the New York Times actual list. The least read of all of them are All Aunt Hagar's Children and Wayward Lives, which each have under 4,000 ratings each on Goodreads. Now I know I said there were 2 books out of the 10 that I had never heard of prior to this list. While yes, I've heard of this author whose name I think I mispronounced, it's Hilary Mantel. I had heard of this, but I didn't know what it was. So it's about Henry VIII, who, I don't know who this man is. He could be walking down the street. I wouldn't know a thing. I'm so sorry to this man. Maybe if I hadn't dropped out of History 11 on the first day because the teacher scared me, I would have learned about this man. Just kidding, kind of. If you know anything about me and my channel and my reading, you know that royalty is the least interesting thing to me to consume. I haven't watched I've never watched anything related to royalty, whether fiction or real. Never watched The Crown, never watched The Tudors, never watched Reign, never watched The Favorite, even though I love Emma Stone, never watched The King, though I love Timothée Chalamet. I didn't watch The Princess Diaries until last year. I hated Red, White, and Royal Blue. I don't want to read this. I don't want to read that. All of that to say, I have not hit the 50% mark. In fact, I don't even know if I've hit the 25% mark. I just want you to know that when I finish this, it's going to be one of the most fulfilling moments because then I can do anything. It's not that the book is bad. It's just that I could not care any less. And if I can read 700 pages physically, because I want to switch to the audiobook, but I know I'll zone out about this king who so badly wants a male heir that he wants to leave his wife and get with this other lady, calling Anne Boleyn another lady. Who am I? Like I've made it. I've done it. I've won at everything. I don't know who Thomas Cromwell is. He's the focus of this story. He is a political genius, a briber, a bully, and a charmer. And he is going to, I don't know, help the people, the political establishment, and reshape England, I guess. I'm reading the synopsis because I'm 25% in and I don't know what this book's about. I fear my review will be incoherent, but I'm reading it. I'm looking at the words. I'm trying to take them in. Welcome to day 2 of reading this book. I'm still in my pajamas. I'm making progress. I'm like halfway through, and the little tab that I have is the moment on page 213 that I realized I do know Henry VIII. You know why? Because I've read Henry VIII. It may have been 18 years ago, but these characters started to feel a little familiar. And I was like, wait, maybe I have heard of these people before. Maybe I do understand this dynamic. The moment I realized it was when, who even was it? Was it the king or was it Thomas? I don't know, because every single sentence just starts with he. No matter how many people are in the scene, it's just he. He did this, he said that. It's usually the main character. But anyway, he goes outside, whoever he is. He leans against the wall, he's crying. He says to himself, let George Cavendish not come by and see me and write it down and make it into a play. And I was like, a play? A play? I've read a play that has these people. Anyway, my thoughts are nothing. I might as well just like pretend to be reading this and just like finish out the clip and start my next book because I don't know what's going on. I don't understand the plot. There's just so much talking. There's so much dialogue that I don't know what this book is about. And it's got me thinking, would people like this book the same? Would it be as widely read if it wasn't based on real events and real people? Like if this was just an imagined country, an imagined royalty, and it was made up politics and the religious dynamic that people are trying to change with who can marry who and how all of the royal things work out. Would people care? Would people enjoy it as much? I'm just so curious because I don't know anything. I don't know if these people are actually, I don't know how much of this is the author's interpretation, if she is bending the traits of certain people, or if this is completely historically accurate. How much is which? Are the bones like the same, but there are certain things that just fit into her vision that she imagined was happening? Obviously, like the conversations are hers, and since it's mostly dialogue, like this is her take on things, but I just don't know enough to know what I don't know. And I'm not having a good time. Like I'm not enjoying my reading experience. I still have 300 more pages to read. It's me in my pajamas again for my day 3 update of Wolf Hall. I finished the book. I'm done. As expected, I don't have many thoughts and I don't have a proper review for you, so I'm just gonna move on. I think this objectively is an interesting portrait of a man. He literally gets a portrait done in here, and I think that was very referential of the idea of this book and how we and everyone else sees him differently depending on what perspective you're looking at him through. He starts his life in a very unprivileged position, has a goal, wants to be in this position of power, makes all the moves he needs to, moves up in the ranks, and becomes someone that people trust and believe in. And there are multiple books that come after this that follow more events of his rise and fall. And I just didn't like it. I have to give it a 2, and it feels like stupid of me to say that because there's nothing wrong with this book, but my rating is my rating. Can't give the book a rating that I think it deserves or other people would give it. I struggled, but I completed it and I feel accomplished, and I have to move on to something else. Although I think my next book is even longer than this one. This one is a small stat, but I thought it was just worth noting that 3 out of the 72 fiction books on the list are debut novels. This definitely makes sense because the most probably beloved books are ones that come from authors who have been writing for decades. They're career authors. They have so much out there that people have enjoyed, and that's why they get picked up. So I just think it's very cool that 3 authors on this list, this was the first thing they ever published, and they got featured on, so far, the best books of the entire century. I mentioned fiction specifically because it's so less common for that to happen. With nonfiction, a lot of these books are somebody's life work, so they might be the first thing that they publish as well, which is incredible, but it might be the only thing that they ever publish. A lot of times a nonfiction is specifically about an event, or it's a memoir, so it's encompassing someone's life, or it's something that somebody has a lot of passion about, just that one thing, or has spent their life studying that one thing. This next book is the first book that Isabel Wilkerson published, her nonfiction debut, and it took 15 years of research before it came out. Today, I'll be reading The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration. This I started a little bit. I'm currently at my parents', hanging out, taking care of my grandma while they go celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary. I'm also hanging out with their new kitty cat. She might come over. She's a little skittish, hence why her name is Skitty, and she's very wet. She's from a big like farm rescue that the SPCA did. I feel like she said there was like 300 cats or something. And for the first couple months, like she would not come near you. If you tried to touch her, she would attack. Anyway, what's different about this compared to other books that I've read that are similar, covering this portion of history from 1915 to 1970, this is why I couldn't have pets, is they're often just very factual, like textbook. And this one is about, there's, I think, she opened it saying there's 3 specific like characters who she met, and she did a lot of research, talked to a lot of people, did a lot of interviews, but there's 3 specific people that we're going to follow in here, and they're sharing their journey. And then with a lot of the author inserting like facts about the time and like general ideas of groups of people and how people were escaping slavery and what happened, where they went, why they went certain places, and what their families looked like. So I'm gonna be here for like 5 hours, which I think I can get a good chunk in. I'm not sure how many pages I read because I grabbed the audiobook, and I don't know that I love it. I love the narrator. I think it's Robin Miles, and I've listened to a lot of fiction by her. I was feeling really conflicted about the audiobook, and I couldn't get my thoughts across properly, and I probably still can't, but I just didn't know if her specific like lighter, softer cadence was really matching what I was physically reading. Because when I physically picked it up, it was a much more intense and brutal and devastating series of stories, and just like experiencing the world and seeing it explained. It's full of beauty and freedom and perseverance, but it also is a heavy read. And what I was reading physically and then listening to just wasn't really matching up. So I waited until I had more time to physically dedicate to this. So I read it yesterday and today, and I did end up giving it a 5-star. Like this is an incredible book, and it's no wonder why this is something that has landed for so many people, covering this moment in time. I think I said escaping slavery. That's not what this time period is. It's post-slavery. I misspoke. It's Jim Crow. It's segregation. It's, hey, you have these rights now, but not really. Like, we're gonna share the farm now, but we're really just gonna break even constantly. I'm never gonna owe you anything, even though you should be making a proper income. But it's still, you still feel like you belong to someone. In every state, even though the whole point is migration, people are leaving, people are fleeing, people are moving to other places where they've heard greater things are going to happen for them. But every state like has its own unique brand of racism. So this is liberating, but it's also dangerous. It was brave, but it's also confusing and inconsistent. I learned some various things in here. Obviously, you know, there's different benches, there's different bathrooms, there's different places where Black folks have to go compared to white folks. But there was things I definitely did not know, like you know, Black folks fought for their right to drive and have licenses, but you weren't legally allowed to pass a white driver. Or if you were sitting at a stop sign, you legally had the right of way, if there was a white driver, you weren't allowed to follow the law. Like, it's a different law. And obviously the people in charge are just trying to find any way to continue to make people that they see lesser than them to feel lesser than them. Because it does kind of read like fiction, I understand why people are drawn to this. It's a much easier read than you might expect with the length. And I also think it appeals because this is greatly researched. Like, this is one of the best, I want to say plotted books, but it's not a plot, like just the best organized. The way that this author mixed together, like just telling a story and then inserting moments of like actual interviews. You can tell are actual quotes from these 3 people. We were focused on Ida, George, and Robert. They have similar stories, but they're also so different. And you forget that you're reading a nonfiction, and then the author, she will like insert herself into the story and be like, oh, and then I went with George to this event and he talked about this. She spent time with these people. Years of their lives are in here. And it's also about like later down the road reflecting on, should I go back to that place? My family wants to move, or I've heard things have changed everywhere. Do I trust it? Do I trust going back to the South? One of these characters is a doctor. He is an important figure, and yet he's taking this long drive and can't find a hotel that will allow him to sleep, and he's exhausted, and he's a danger to people behind the wheel because he needs to sleep, but he can't find a place to sleep. So there's moments like that that are very personal anecdotes, and then she also slides in just like bigger talking points about what the entire country or an entire state or an entire city was going through. There's no way that I can sum up a 600-page experience in just a couple minutes. So I'm just gonna leave it with, this is my #1 recommendation. I think that everybody will gain something from this. Knowledge and appreciation for the writing, an understanding of the time period, and just getting to know these 3 people who you don't know. Everyone's got a story, and theirs is of such determination that I think this was really valuable. So that's that. My final stat here is about publishing houses. I wanted to include something about this just because I think it's interesting to know where the books are coming from, the types of publishing houses that get featured on lists like this, and I'm sure somebody else could discuss why. This stat is hard though, because I've said before, I don't know a lot about publishing. I don't really understand all of the imprints and who belongs to what and all of the melding of the publishing houses. But I think from what I understand is Penguin Random House is responsible for half of these titles, if I'm associating all of the imprints to the right places. Little Brown, if that's the overarching one, made a strong showing with about 20 titles. Harper is responsible for 8. 7 are from Scribner, and a handful of indies. 3 are from Grey Wolf, 2 from Faber, and all 3 of Elena Ferrante's are from Europa Editions, who I'm reading from next. Hello. Oh, you can't see me? There's nothing I can do about it. I was just about to turn on the camera and say, my house is so dark. It's 2 p.m. Like, it's only 2 p.m. It's so dark. There's a storm brewing, and I have something in the crock pot, and if power goes out, I'm gonna be so mad. And right before I click record, the power goes out. I was wearing my sunniest shirt. I'm in the best mood. I have to finish this vlog today. Like, I absolutely have to finish it, but you can't see me. I've had that thing in the crock pot for 5 hours. Was that lightning? I guess if I open this, maybe you can see me. Oh, also we're supposed to go to a concert in the park tonight. Like, so much for that. Oh, the power's out at my husband's work too. The last time our power went out, I also had something in the crock pot. And when I tell you, I haven't made something in my crock pot, like these are the 2 times in the last year, maybe I've used my crock pot. Maybe I'm responsible. Maybe it's my fault. I hope this isn't a bad omen for how my book's gonna go. I will say I'm halfway through it and I'm unfortunately not loving it. No. Why? Anyway, this is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante, and the book kicks off with our 2 main characters, Elena and Lila, and it opens with them as adults. And Elena, I'm scared. Elena, her friend has gone missing. They have grown children. This is a quartet, so there is books to come where you follow them, I guess, through their adulthood. We open with this understanding of how this friendship dynamic is going, and then we flash back to when they first became friends. This is set in the 1950s, just outside of Naples, and these 2 girls, they have things in common. Their families are a little bit different. They both are like working hard in school and want and have the opportunity to continue their education, but they have to convince their parents, and it costs money. It's just not really a priority for both of the girls' families. So there's certain things that are intruding on their beautiful friendship. I was interested in the very beginning. The first quarter of this, I was like having an interesting time getting to know all of these characters. They have like enemies, they have suitors. The first 50% has followed them into like high school age. And then the second quarter, I just am bored. This isn't a plot focused book. I'm not waiting for a big event to happen. I'm not waiting for something, but it feels like I'm waiting for something. It feels like there's going to be this moment that we're building to because there's all of this tension, but I also don't think that that's what this book is. It's just an appreciation of the writing and the building out of these characters. Okay, my husband's gonna bring me a power source, so maybe you can plug in the crock pot to finish it. I don't know, I'm just gonna sit here and I'm gonna continue reading, and I have nothing else to do now that I don't have power and don't have anywhere to go. So I'll wrap it up and then tell you all of my thoughts. Okay, the power actually came back on pretty swiftly and, well, like within half an hour. And my crock pot meal survived. Not only that, it was one of the best ones I've ever made. So, hooray. I needed that win because this unfortunately was not, I have no critiques about it. It just was another book, not necessarily for me. It's about these two girls figuring out what kind of life they want. And Elena is looking at her friend who she thinks is more beautiful, has so many opportunities, is better than her in some ways, and watches her go down certain paths in life that she wouldn't choose or she doesn't agree with. It started to remind me a little bit of Summer Sisters, but maybe just because I read it so recently. And typically my experience with women's friendship stories is they're really soft and beautiful and loving, or they're really toxic. And these two just straddle the line. And I get why other people like that, just this exploration of these young women trying to figure out their lives. Education is a big focus in here, but more so relationships, who they want to be with, what kind of life they want to build. Are they actually in love with these people, or are they just being kept? They're envious of each other. They want the best for each other. It's a little bit messy, but overall, it's just kind of dull. What wasn't dull is the vivid picture that this painted of this time in history in this place. It was very well described, and I think obviously you can attribute that to Elena Ferrante, but also the translator Anne Goldstein. I enjoyed learning what life was like for people. There was poverty explored, class explored, there was violence. There was a child who was thrown out of a window, which I was very caught off guard by, but it had great prose, and I think that's why people love this. I can see this being people's favorite book, but I don't know. Like 500 people agreeing that this is the best book of the century. Not that I have anything that I would put above it objectively, just it's not all that I expected it to be. And perhaps if I carried on through to book 4, I would have even more to enjoy. Maybe coming back to this isn't just a good standalone experience, but when people return after reading the entire thing, it feels that much more impactful. And I wish I cared about these characters and their journeys enough to want to read on, but I will not. I'm gonna give it a 3. The writing itself, like, it has to be a 3. Plot-wise, character-wise, I didn't care enough. The ending was unsatisfying. That I'm sure is intentional, so I hold no, like, negative feelings towards that. And with that, I have officially read the 10 best books of the century so far. Look how well it all fits in my final basket. I have my ranking here. My 5 stars all the way to my 2 stars. I Never Let You Go would be solidly here if I still owned it, but then my basket would be overflowing. I don't know that I have anything profound to say. I don't think my brain has any room for any thoughts after the 4,600 pages I just read. Obviously, I haven't read the entire 100. I haven't read the 100 Reader's Choice. I haven't read hundreds of other books out there. So it's impossible for one person to ever say the best books. It's impossible to say if I think that these are validly here. But what I will say, as far as how maybe my reading differs, and something that I can notice from this stack, is these are all very consistent books, and they're the types of books that you can appreciate the prose more than anything else. They're enjoyable most at a micro level and a macro level, and whatever would be in the middle is what I most love about books. What I mean is they're the types of stories that you appreciate line by line, sentence by sentence, at its minuscule level, the word choices, that's something that people appreciate most. And then also on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, looking at each of these books as an experience, as what the book is saying, what the book is representing, that's where they're appreciated. And each book here is a very consistent experience. All of them, I started out having the same feelings at the beginning as the end. I didn't change, the book didn't change throughout it. It was exactly what you came to expect the book to be and to say. It did by the end. The word dependable is something that sounds like it should be most applicable to authors. An author you can go to and you know what to expect and you know that you're gonna love their writing. But I also think that a book can be dependable. When you start the book, it ends the way that you think it should. And I think that's a great thing for a book to do, the synopsis or the opening, to give you an idea of what it's going to be. It meets your expectations. When I look at my own reading, that's not something that I think is untrue for me, that I gave some 5 stars here. I also like books that have a dependable structure, but I most enjoy books not at the tiny level or the overarching level, but I like a book where I can appreciate scene by scene, things constantly moving, things constantly changing, and my expectations being challenged. Like, have you ever listened to a song and you think that when they rhyme something, like that's not what I thought they were about to say, or that's not the perfect rhyme for that spot. Why would they do that? I love when books do that. I love when I don't know what the author is going to do and they play with my own expectations. And it challenges me as a reader to have to rethink what I thought about certain characters or what a book was going to make me think. A lot of books that I consider my best reading experiences are when the author leaves me in the dark about something, reveals something later, or references something I forgot about, or has something that just makes me think. And the actual journey as a reader is what I think about when I think about impactful books, not necessarily the stories that were the most beautifully told. It's the experience that I had while I was inside of them. I think my greatest takeaway from these top 10 is the fact that I can absolutely recognize people who love these and why. And I do think if I were one of the ones voting and suggesting things, that would be top of mind for me, is more objectively enjoyable or even just palatable stories. Nothing here changed my life, but I'm really glad to have read them. I hope you learned something along the way about them or about me, and I will see you next in a vlog that's probably way stupider than this one. I hope you stick around. Bye!